Hi, welcome to Mini Movies. Today I'm going to explain an American science fiction drama film called The Man from Earth, Holocene. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The professor in charge, Carolyn, is explaining about Homo sapiens living in the Holocene epoch in a prehistoric museum in the city. As it happens, a student named Isabel is sketching the skulls of a prehistoric human across the hallway. She is then accompanied by her best friend and classmate, Tara, who informs her about the presence of Professor John Young in the museum. John is a religious-related course teacher, and he's there with his girlfriend, Carolyn. Isabel and Tara decide to walk up and greet him while he's examining the prehistoric human exhibit. After speaking for a while, Tara informs him about her wish to take a picture with him. He immediately changes the conversation and walks away. After that, Lyko, a college student who is also interested in boxing, is then picked up by his best friend Philip, and they both head to college, where they, along with Isabel and Tara, attend John's class and discuss the difference between Jesus and Buddha. They ask him many questions, and he answers them all with his knowledge on the subject. After the class, Isabel and Tara approach John and invite him for a vegan dinner to celebrate the end of the academic year. He politely declines, telling them that he's not a vegan. Later that day, John is approached by his coworker, who's also a professor, named Gil. He delivers John the happy news that he's now a grandfather. To celebrate the birth of the child, they drink by the sports stadium. As they're drinking, Gil asks John whether he regrets having no kids, but John refuses to answer, suggesting that he does regret not having a normal life. Later that evening, Isabel comes to John's house to give Carolyn some of her assignments, which need to be graded. After giving the assignments, she asks for books that she can borrow from John. John gives her a book, including the one written by author Jenkins. Back at the apartment, Isabel and Tara read the book and notice the book is signed by the author with the writing, "To my dear friend John Oldman." Based on the date on the author's signature, they deduce the age of John and get confused about why the author used a different second name, Oldman, instead of Young, when John was 30 years younger at that time. They look up author Jenkins on the internet and find out that he's a renowned archaeologist and has written a book about a university professor who practices Buddhism and claims to be 14,000 years old. Everyone thinks the book is science fiction, even though he claimed it to be non-fiction. They get a little suspicious whether John Oldman and John Young are the same person. The following day, Isabel, Tara, and Philip visit Lyko at his house and enthusiastically explain to them that they have just discovered an immortal man who knows many things and teaches at a local college. They also learn that the man doesn't have any identity or pictures available on the internet. He lives 10 years at a place with one identity, then shifts to another place with a different identity, but always maintains the first name John. Lyko and Philip question the truth about the story, but agree to help the girls find more about their professor John. Meanwhile, somewhere in Nevada, Jenkins is seen gardening with his pet pig Betsy. When he returns home, Jenkins notices mail from Isabel inquiring about his book and John Oldman, about whom he wrote in the book. He suddenly gets annoyed and replies to her by saying "go to hell." Since there's no good response from Jenkins, the students decide to break into John's house to find more proof. In the basement, Lyko finds a box full of books written by John with different second names and takes pictures of all the books. As this happens, Isabel notices Carolyn's car approaching in the driveway. They all escape through the back door after taking a picture of John from a framed photograph in the living room. The students dig more about the identities of the different authors named John and find out that each identity doesn't exist. The publishers also don't have any connection with the authors anymore. Meanwhile, back at the house, John doesn't feel like himself and wishes to go out in nature. Therefore, he decides to go hunting. Carolyn doesn't agree with it at first, but later, understanding that John needs some time for himself, she lets him go. He drives into the woods and spends the night there. In the woods, when he tries to make fire by rubbing stones, like in the prehistoric period, John accidentally cuts his hand and starts bleeding. Usually, any injury that occurs to him heals very fast, but this time, to his surprise, John is not healing as he's supposed to. Confused about the sudden change occurring in his body, he heads back to his house. Isabel calls Jenkins again, but this time she tells him directly that Professor John Young and John Oldman in Jenkins' book are the same person. Jenkins hears the voicemail and agrees to meet with her, only if she could send him a picture of her Professor John. After that, Isabel also receives a call from an old woman saying that she knows a person called John Piles, who was in her class in 1957. This is actually a response to the emails that they've sent to different colleges inquiring about the John they know. believing that he might have worked in those colleges as a professor before. Since everyone's contacting them asking for a picture, the students decide to take a picture of John. The next day at school, the three of them offer John a coffee and ask him to pose for a photo with them. But John messes up the shots to not fully show his face. As a result, the students aren't able to get the photo. After the class, the three of them try to convince Philip, who's still skeptical, that John might be Jesus Christ, the person that Christians worship. The students have no plan to give up, so Isabel and Lyco sneak into John's house at night and snap some pictures with his face clearly visible. Isabel then sends the picture to Jenkins. After seeing it, Jenkins agrees to meet and talk. Meanwhile, Tara comes to John's office and flirts with him, but John rejects her and shows her out of the office. Unfortunately, during flirting, she mistakenly reveals that she knows everything about John and his past life. John realizes the danger and tells Gil that he wants to quit and also recommends a replacement lecture. Gil is disappointed and confused, but accepts his request. At home, John also convinces Carolyn about his wish to leave the city. Back at Isabel's apartment, Tara confesses her action to Isabel, making them realize that John might disappear sooner and change his identity again. The students then call Jenkins for help, but he still needs at least 2 hours to drive to reach them, so they decide to hold John back from escaping until Jenkins arrives. At home, John is burning all of his photos with Carolyn and gets ready to leave the place. After he was about to leave, the 4 students meet him on the porch, and Isabel shows up with a book written by Jenkins and demands that John admits that he's John Oldman, the living embodiment of Jesus Christ. But John refuses and asks them to leave. However, Lyco uses a taser gun on John, and he falls unconscious. Meanwhile, Jenkins' car breaks down on the road, and he informs the students that he'll be arriving later than expected. So the students take unconscious John, tie him in the basement, and wait for Jenkins to arrive. When John wakes up, he sees Philip guarding him. While the others have gone to pick up Jenkins, John begs Philip to release him. But Philip wants to know the truth and asks John to reveal his true identity. Seeing that Philip is a religious person, he accepts that he's Jesus Christ and tells him that he taught a group of people about basic spiritual wisdom, which then developed into Christianity, and people called him Christ. Philip believes him and decides to cut him loose, but as he's about to do it, he remembers that Christ has powers, and if John is really the Christ, then he can free himself with the power instead of begging Philip. Convinced that John is not Christ, Philip then thinks of the Antichrist. John counters him by saying the Antichrist concept never exists in the Bible and never refers to a single person. Later, John tells Philip to stab him. If Philip still believes that John is any kind of threat to religion or society, Philip takes the chance and stabs him in the chest, thinking that if John truly is Jesus Christ, he wouldn't die. But after the stab, John seems dead and blood is trickling down from the wound. Philip is shocked and leaves the basement crying, believing that he killed John. On the road, the other 3 students with Jenkins try contacting Philip to know the situation, but when they don't get any response, the group begins to worry about Philip and John. When they arrive at the basement, they find a broken chair and a pool of blood, but no sign of John and Philip. Jenkins tells the others to look at every hospital nearby, hoping that Philip and John would be taken to a treatment there for any injuries. After an undisclosed amount of time, we see John waking up in a cave. A man named Harry is approaching the cave, calling out his name. Harry gives him some clothes and other survival gear, which John accepts happily. Harry then asks him to come to his house, which John agrees to, and they both leave in Harry's car. As this is happening, an FBI agent knocks on Jenkins' door and inquires about John. The agent asks him whether John is capable of doing anything violent, which Jenkins is not sure about, after he saw the basement that he escaped from full of blood.